So let's look at finishing off the CRUD site, and I want to talk about two things. So the first thing we're going to look at is how we can make the site look a little more polished, and then we'll talk about sort of trapping errors in the site. So this is going to cover talking about the design of the site. Now I'm just going to show you some CSS designs here. It is important to note that CSS isn't being evaluated or assessed on this particular module, but it's important that you understand how CSS is used in modern web applications. And the concept here is that basically, rather than sort of munging both the design and the content together, what we'll actually do is we'll extract out both the content and the design separately into two different documents. So the content, that's going to be semantic HTML, it's going to be our PHP application. Design, that's done using cascading style sheets. And the way that this is actually implemented is you'll have your content, so that's going to be HTML and PHP in plain text files. And in separate files, you'll have style sheets. And if you've done CSS before, this is what they look like. Remember, this isn't going to be a CSS course. The important concept to grasp here is that the design is in a separate file from the content. Those two are combined together, and when you do that, you do end up with your final transform document. So let's actually have a look at our kind of design for the application that we're working with. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a 3 horizontal layout for panels. And what I've done is I've called them banner, main and site information. And so what happens is when we actually implement this design, what we'll end up with is 3 separate panels where we can actually place content. So it's going to look like that. So there'll be a kind of banner at the top. There's the main bit in the middle, which is white. That's where our content will go. And then we've got space down the bottom for our kind of site information. That's the footer, if you like. And that big white panel in the middle, what we're going to do is we're just going to split that into 2, and often sites look like this. We'll have a menu, and then we'll have content. Now this is going to be a very clunky design. I mean, I'm not a designer, but I just want to give you an idea that this is how we're going to implement something like this in CSS. And what we'll have to do is we'll have to make sort of minor changes to the HTML, actually insert some HTML into the pages. Now the way that we're going to do that is to use div tags, and I'm just going to use an id here to actually mark out each of the different parts of the document. I mean, all we're really doing is we're creating names for bits of the document. So you can see at the top I've got a bit that's going to be the banner, and I've called that id equals banner, and then I've got a main bit, and that main bit's going to have a menu in it, and it's going to have a content bit in it, and then down the bottom we've got our site information. So in those gaps, that's where our HTML and PHP will go to make the site work. So just working away back from the beginning again, here's the banner, and inside the banner we'll have some HTML that does this kind of thing, an H1, an H2 and an H3, and I've styled that so it looks something like this. So that CRUD system there, that's the H1, all your database operations in one place, that's the H2, and then you can see I've styled the H3 so that it's right aligned, just like that. The menu, well, the way that this is done is with a series of hyperlinks, and all we do is we style those in a particular way to make them look like a menu. I've just put a border around the outside. Here's the content, and what will happen is whatever the content of the page is, so if it's a form or if it's a request for an emp number, something like that, it'll go in this space, in this gap. So just as an example, I put an H1 and a couple of paragraphs like this, and you can see it looks like this. Finally, down the bottom we've got a site information section, and on all of the pages our site information will simply be a link back to the main page and a link to this sort of about this site page that we're going to have, and that will look like that. And when this is all brought together, our final design will look a bit like this. Now it's a bit clunky, but it doesn't really matter. It's just the notion that you've got banners, you've got an area for your main content, you've got a menu system, and you've got a kind of site information footer thing. Now I'm not going to go into explaining the actual CSS that creates this. If you want to have a look at it, you can download the style file and you can see all the rules that actually create all the different parts of the document. But that's not that relevant to what we're talking about in this module. But I just want to show you this is the kind of thing you can do. Now often, if you're doing an actual application, web application, you would probably hire a designer, and then the designer would come in with boards showing you the designs. Once that had been signed off, you'd actually probably employ somebody to actually just create the CSS. And then that CSS would be imported into your application. So you could outsource the design and outsource the implementation of that design in CSS to third parties. And then it would just be kind of bundled into the application. So as an example, what we can do is we can, for example, take the emp template file and we can create an emp about file. And you can see here, all it really requires us to do is to put some content into the different parts. So this is the top part. This remains very similar to what we would expect. But here it's down here. It's in the content part of the page where we actually add in an H1 and some paragraphs, just saying what this site is about.